by nominating Judge Neil Gorsuch of the United States Supreme Court.
The Trump administration condemns such actions by Iran that undermine security. As of today, we are officially putting Iran on notice.
Welcome to The Right Question. I'm Hugo Gurdon, editorial director of the Washington Examiner. Thanks for joining us. I'm joined today by Byron York and also by Fred Barnes of the Weekly Standard. President Trump has been tweeting up a storm again. He's been tweeting about Iran, about the Supreme Court, about the need to use the nuclear option, about riots in Berkeley. So he's given us before breakfast what most presidents might give in a week. Fred, what of all of these things should we be focusing on, and what's the question that we should be asking about this stuff?
The question is the Supreme Court nominee, and the question is, what are Democrats going to do? Are they going to have a filibuster that forces Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader, to get rid of the filibuster entirely on Supreme Court nominees? I think probably not. But this is a Republican nominee who's replacing a Republican nominee. That was Justice Scalia. This is a trial run for the next one, maybe this summer, in which it will be a less conservative seat. And you have to win this one, and then the other one comes up, which will be a little harder.
Does that mean you think that enough Democrats are going to side with Gorsuch, going to vote for Gorsuch this time around?
Well, the question is whether they're going to go for it. They'll probably need 8 of them to get over a filibuster, and I think there's a pretty good chance they'll get them, and maybe the Democrats won't even try a filibuster.
Yeah. Do you think the president should be optimistic on this?
Yeah, I think there were 5 Democrats up in 2018 who came from states that Trump won by double digits. So you got 5 right there. I just think there's nothing in it for them to oppose him. So the question is, are there some others who maybe would like to do that? The answer is probably yes. I think part of this shows the wisdom, or cleverness at least, of Trump doing this rollout event in prime time. Gorsuch just kind of looks like the man for the job. Very pleasant looking man, obviously very intelligent, great record, and you put him on in prime time. In by the way, what was a kind of a restrained event. I mean, some people thought there was going to be some sort of a gong and a reality TV show feel to it, but it was basically the kind of event you would have in the Rose Garden, except they did it at 8 p.m. So actually, it was a very good sales job, and I would actually be surprised if Democrats decide that this is the hill we need to die on. I think they'll hold off on the filibuster.
Right. So it was a well-presented event. Was he also the right pick in that there's a kind of an irony here? He's seen to be walking in the footsteps of Antonin Scalia, a real textualist and originalist, and yet at the same time, he's somebody that Democrats are going to find, to even setting aside the politics, in terms of qualifications, he's immensely well qualified. So was it a good pick from, substantive pick as well?
Well, I think so, and because for one thing, he's a brilliant writer, like Scalia. Not quite as good, not quite as biting as Scalia, but a beautiful writer.
Give him time
in his opinions, and that's one thing. And you know what else helps him? I think he's never ruled on or written an opinion on an abortion case. He's had some very controversial cases, whether it's the Hobby Lobby case,
right.
And he's written a book about euthanasia, opposing it. But he can't. I don't think they can bog him down on abortion. So I think he's close to a perfect pick.
Well, I think a lot of people on Trump's list would have been perfect picks. I mean, basically the smart thing in Trump's doing a list of 21 nominees, candidates, during the campaign. He puts out this list. He does it in cooperation with Leonard Leo, the Federalist Society, the people who really kind of determine, whether conservatives really like a nominee or not. And he puts out this list and says, I'm going to pick from this list. So, and the list was extremely well received. If you remember, there were some never-Trumpers who said, it's a great list. I just don't trust Donald Trump to pick somebody from it.
Right.
But there was no question it was a great list. So come his presidency, he could shut his eyes and put his finger on a name, and everybody would have said, this is a great choice.
You know, one of the people who was looking at the list was former Senator Rick Santorum, who was behind one particular guy. But what he looked for when he saw the first list was one bad candidate, somebody who was not a provable conservative.
So we've talked about the Supreme Court, and that fits into an astonishing couple of weeks. What else? What's the big issue that we should be focusing on, not just for the Supreme Court, but the 2 weeks, the start?
Well, I think rather than focusing on any particular issue, I think you need to try to kind of look past the various hysterias of the day, the daily fire hose, and say, how is the U.S. government policy different because of Donald Trump being president? And I think the most consequential things we've seen so far are the court nomination, are the first immigration executive order. We've been talking a lot about this immigration executive order, which basically is this 90-day moratorium on non-American entry into the United States from these 7 countries. But there was one the week before that basically put an end to catch and release on the border. It changed the policies of the Border Patrol significantly, and if enacted, will probably make a major change in illegal crossings of the border before there's ever a wall. So there's a lot of really significant stuff that Trump has done if you can divert your attention from, oh, he was mean to the Australian Prime Minister, oh, he said this or he said that. There's a lot going on.
Yeah, one of the things that strikes me is that there's so much that's new that it takes attention away from what there was before. So you can actually be kind of not realize quite how much is being done. I mean, we used to say when President Clinton was in the White House that, you know, one scandal made people forget about the previous one. And what's happening in the first 2 weeks of Trump is that he's producing so much new policy that it's quite easy to forget what was going on before. Does that strike you the same way?
It does. And of course, when he does something that works, like the first immigration order that Byron was talking about, it doesn't get much of attention because the press, and particularly the elite Eastern press, the Washington Post and the New York Times, they're only interested in what he does that they think is wrong and is poorly introduced or is a bad policy or there's a bad rollout or something. That's what they're interested in. Yeah. When he does it, like the Supreme Court nominee is a good example. He has a terrific nominee, and so the media moves on quickly.
Right. This is something that, Byron, you and I have talked about before, where he's always operating on 2 different tracks. There's the kind of distracting track and the achievement track. Talk a bit about that.
Well, with Trump during the campaign, we saw this during the campaign, and it has continued during his presidency. There's always some controversy of the day that everybody gets their hair on fire about, and it dominates cable TV coverage, it dominates a lot of the commentary. And meanwhile, during the campaign, he was doing, sort of unbeknownst to a lot of people, the kind of boring, plodding, step-by-step work toward winning the presidency. He ends up winning Ohio, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, which nobody would have thought beforehand. Right. So there was this distraction level, and then there was this substance level, and I think we're seeing it again in his presidency. But what is important, though, is for him to actually follow up on this. I mean, I talked about these changes he's made in border enforcement. 6 months from now, they better be in effect. It can't be just an executive order or one day's news and then they forget about it. And the only way it's going to be able to affect it is if Trump forces it to be, because the federal bureaucracy may be different with the Border Patrol. I think there's a lot of support for him there, but so much of the federal bureaucracy is dead set opposed to him, and to make it change is going to be his biggest goal.
Right, he's certainly going to have to move the bureaucracy along with him. So has Trump won his first 2 weeks, or have his opponents won the first 2 weeks?
Well, some opponents think they've won, the elite media, but I think the Trump constituency, and even more than just his original constituency, but Republicans who were upset with him and didn't vote for him in the primaries, I think they're more satisfied than they expected to be. Now, I think there are 2 problems. One of them was the rollout of the second immigration order, which, suspended people coming from certain countries, largely Muslim, well, all of them countries with heavily Muslim populations. But there's another thing that I think he did that was a mistake that hasn't been really talked about much, and that's alienating the entire country of Mexico, and from the president on down. The truth is that America needs Mexico. They're a close neighbor. They have a great trading partner, despite all the stuff that Trump says. And Trump wants to renegotiate the North American Free Trade Agreement. Well, that's not going to happen if he treats Mexico like that they deserve no respect whatsoever. You know, a country like Mexico up against the U.S., they really are sensitive to any slights, and he has certainly slighted them.
Right, and would you also? How would you judge the first 2 weeks? That was Mexico was certainly has created some problems for him down the road. But has he been winning the?
Well,
the
this goes back
to
to the fire hose thing. I think in a normal presidency, if he rolled out a very well received Supreme Court nomination, I think people will say it's been a great 2 weeks. You know, that would be enough. Right. To judge something successful. So he's done much more than that. I personally think that he has probably won these first couple of weeks. The problems with the what's called the Muslim ban, which is it's just harder to say, the 90-day moratorium on non-American entry from 7 terror-infested countries. The rollout problems were, one, he didn't account for people with green cards, that is legal permanent residents in the United States. They should not have been covered by that. And two, he didn't make special case accounting for people, especially in Iraq, who had helped the United States and put themselves in danger for the United States during the war. So he didn't do those two things. He did fix them not too long afterwards. So I think that they're going to end up being fine, because most of the, certainly all, I think, of the valid legal challenges to it had to do with those things, and they all involved people who were physically inside the United States.
So the immigration executive order produced a huge amount of protest. Mm-hmm. There's been protest every day of the Trump presidency. Mm-hmm. Can the left sustain this? Is this going to build, or will this peter out? And is it helping Trump? Or is it actually just building the sense that his presidency in and of itself is a kind of crisis for the country?
Well, they think it is a crisis for the country, and everything Trump does is unconstitutional. But it is different from the Tea Party. The Tea Party had strong ideological objections to what Obama was doing as president. There really aren't strong ideological objections to Trump. They just don't like Trump. They hate Trump. So anything he does, even things that Republican conservatives don't like, they're going to dislike too. So for that reason, I think it'll peter out if Trump continues to do well and does a little better, doesn't make mistakes like he has in the rollout of this second immigration thing, because that's what they dislike. It is Trump who really sets them off.
Right. There is a sense that the fable of the boy who cried wolf has been cited many times. I mean, the left is crying democracy every day and every night. I mean, is there a sense that each time they do this, they dilute the strength of that?
Well, I think you have to separate. I think you have to separate the Democratic Party and some elements of the left, especially those in civil disobedience. Clearly, the Democrats are not going to stop opposing Trump. And right now, I think a danger for them is they've been cheering on, I think, the civil disobedience that we saw arise kind of spontaneously, semi-spontaneously with the immigration order. Then we just saw what happened in Berkeley, California. I think that's a bit of a danger for them, because there are elements on the left that basically want to essentially show the nation that the enactment of Trump policies will come at an enormous cost in peace and public safety. No justice, no peace. That's not going to be very popular. And so I think the relationship of Democrats to this very energetic and angry sliver of the left is going to be really interesting to watch.
And if you throw your mind back 16 years, George Bush came in. Obviously, the election and the Florida vote created a sort of legitimate area of huge controversy. But are we seeing more now? Is the left more riled up now than it was when Bush took over at the White House?
Oh, much more riled up. I mean, they didn't have any objections to Bush personally, really, but except for the fact that he was selected, not elected, if you remember the slogan back then. And they got over that, particularly after 9/11. That really changed the attitude for a period among Democrats. Now they went back to being much more opposition than they. But what we're seeing now, I mean, I've lived my whole life in Washington. I've been covering this stuff for about 40 years, and I've never seen anything quite like this.
This is totally different from the early Bush time. I think the period from January 20, 2001 to September 11, 2001 was really pretty boring, as a matter of fact. As a matter of fact, I had written a story the week before September 11th about how Bush had he'd gotten his tax cut.
Right.
And he was going to do education. He'd kind of done everything he wanted to do. He didn't have any more ideas, and apparently he was going to come up with T-ball initiatives after that. And then, of course, September 11th changed everything. And it did create, when it turned into an invasion of Iraq, it did create this resistance on the left that was really very hardcore and continued
It was hard for
quite
Democrats,
a while.
though, to complain about it since so many of them had voted for it.
Right.
That was another problem. That was a smart thing of him to get so many of them to vote for it. But really, shortly after the election, which was incredibly contentious of 2000, it turned into a really rather placid and boring presidency.
It doesn't seem like there's going to be anything boring this time
I
around
don't see
for
that
a while,
happening,
does it?
no.
All right. Well, look, thanks very much, Fred. Thanks, Byron.
Thank you.
Great to have you on the show. Thanks for watching The Right Question. See you next time.